Daniel Bechtel-Unekis, originally from Iowa, holds a bachelor's degree in Spanish and a master's of divinity from Western Theological Seminary. Daniel transitioned from working in a local church to the nonprofit sector, where he played a pivotal role in creating the Holland Food Club model, and then served as an Ottawa County outreach manager, aiding individuals experiencing homelessness. He co-founded Refresh, a ministry that provides showers and auxiliary services to those living outdoors. Later, as a systems administrator at the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, he trained homeless service providers statewide on best practices and data collection to influence state policy and to develop regional strategic plans for addressing homelessness. After earning his MSW, Daniel shifted focus to clinical social work and is now a full-time psychotherapist at City on a Hill, often offering free therapeutic support in both English and Spanish to uninsured individuals. He lives in Holland, Michigan with his wife, Carrie. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you kindly for the warm welcome. Appreciate that. It's wonderful to be here again. I was here for the first time earlier this summer teaching about homelessness in our area, and it's wonderful to be back to talk a little bit more and to share about poverty. Daniel Bechtel-Unekis is my name, and I am with Digging Deeper. I formed this to try to break down complex social issues for audiences like yourselves who care about what's happening in the world around them and want to be informed about that. So I want to talk about what we'll be doing today. As you may have guessed, based on the title, we're going to be talking about poverty. We're going to define and explore the federal poverty level. We're going to define and explore the ALICE population, and we're going to compare some numbers. So any of you out there who are numbers driven, this will be some fun for you as well. For those of you who aren't, I'll try to make it as painless as possible. I also want to acknowledge up front, this is kind of a 2-week, so I'll be here again next Thursday, and some of this will pick up then. But I appreciate all of you taking time to be here this morning. About sort of the style, I have a preference for a more interactive style, so there will be plenty of opportunities for people to respond. As far as how we're going to do this with a hybrid presentation format, I'm going to have some slides where we have what I'm calling discussion questions, where I'll invite you to talk with the people next to you, come up with an idea. And for many of those, maybe not every single one, but for many of those, Carol is actually going to pass around a microphone for your input or feedback on those. And that's largely for recording purposes. And so our friends joining via Zoom can hear that as well. When I do have those discussion questions, if you're joining via Zoom, glad to have you and would love for you to be able to type your responses in, and then Mary Ellen is going to read those for the class. Then I'll have other questions where I'm calling it popcorn questions. I'll ask, what do you think this might mean? Or what do you think this number might be? And for those, you don't need to wait for a microphone. I'll just repeat what I'm hearing again for everybody joining via Zoom. Let's dive in with our first discussion question. So I'm making this easy on myself. I'm going to make you all talk. I want to know from the people here, what do you think it means to be poor? And who decides who is poor? So I'm going to ask each of you to turn to someone near you and take just a minute or two to come up with some thoughts about this. And if you're joining via Zoom, please feel free to join.
Well, what it means to be poor is a little different than who decides who is poor.
It is.
In other words, there are people who have an income that falls into that Alice category that view themselves as poor when from a perspective of the government, they do not qualify. In other words, the government has specific guidelines to define the poverty level.
Fantastic.
And if you qualify, then you can receive all these benefits, food stamps and housing subsidies and a whole bunch of things. Whereas if you're above that, then you lose those benefits.
Wonderful. Thank you. So first of all, we might need to trade spots. And second, that's a really good response. We're hearing a few things. We're hearing there is a definition and there's an experiential component. Yeah.
What is to be poor means lack of education, lack of support. Okay, lack of support, lack of opportunities, education, the bias people have against others because we see with their eyes instead of seeing with their hearts.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. That's part what I see as being poor on my behalf.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's an element of perception of how you're treated or received in a community. Thank you. One more back here. Told you to wear your running shoes next time.
So I think an interesting point is the safety net idea. So someone maybe meets the poverty line, but doesn't have a safety net, or we maybe kind of traditionally throw around, a poor college student or something.
Yeah.
But really, one of the interesting things Mary brought up is like a single mother.
Yeah.
That earning potential is lower ultimately, and maybe more need for how to more concern maybe about how to allocate fewer resources within a household.
Absolutely. So a few other metrics there: family size, age, family makeup, and whether or not, if I fall, if it all goes poorly, what's underneath me. Wonderful. Any responses from Zoom to share?
Nothing from Zoom.
Okay, that's quite all right. Everybody's entitled to share or not. So just want to leave those opportunities. So
We're gonna take
one other? Yep. Thank you.
We've recently lived in New Jersey, and the cost of renting a place is absolutely astronomical. So I saw a triangle of poverty with getting a job, that was the easy bit.
Yeah.
Getting a shelter, even if it was just a room, but being able to get to the job was the third thing.
Yeah.
So a room was cheapest if you needed a car to get to the job, but if you couldn't afford a car or couldn't drive, that was an issue. Or if you lived on the main drag, the rent was unaffordable, but at least you could walk to work. But you needed the job, the transportation, and the food, or you were just in a position that you just couldn't do anything.
Fantastic. Very interwoven. One last one here, and we'll wait for the microphone again. Thank you. Very much interwoven series of variables. Thank you for that.
I have a question for the whole room, and this is because I have a personal problem, so I'm going to get off on my personal problem in a minute because it's directly into the question. How many people in this room are aware that if you live in the city of Zeeland, the township of Holland, the city of Holland, or parts of Lake Town, that there is public transportation available starting at 6 a.m. daily except Sunday and ending at midnight? How many people know that if you need a ride to home from the train that gets in at 9:30 at night at the Amtrak station, that there is somebody that will pick you up and take you home? How many people in the room are aware? And how many people know how to do it? How do you do it? You have to book it a day before. It's a little on the complicated side.
Yeah.
But I doubt if most people under Alice have any idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is another good point, and we're going to get
And it's very badly publicized.
Yeah. We'll get into a little bit of infrastructure probably next week, but that's a great additional point, that just because a resource exists doesn't necessarily mean that it's known or highly accessible for the people who need it. So thank you for that. All of those are very helpful thoughts. I want to talk a little bit about the federal poverty level, because we did hear that one way that we decide who is poor is numerical, and it's set up as you're in or you're out. So Molly Orshansky is the daughter of immigrants from Ukraine. She's born in 1915, and she is the first in her family to go through high school, the first in her family to go through college, and then goes on to get a graduate degree in statistics and economics and works for the federal government. And a little bit of context around the work that she does: in the 1950s, after World War II, we're seeing prices increase and wages stagnating for a very specific portion of the population, low-income earners. In the early 60s, the poverty rate climbs to 19%. What's the response? War on poverty. Absolutely. President Johnson declares the war on poverty in 64. So where does Molly Orshansky fit into this? In the end of 64 and the beginning of 65, Molly Orshansky, who's working as a government economist, creates what's called the federal poverty level measure. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what that means, what it is. The USDA at that point had different food plans. These were ways that you could conceive of what you should be buying or affording for groceries based on your income level. And they said, well, an economy food plan, which I think is a kind name for it, is about a third of a family's income. So Molly said, well, if you take that times 3, then you're probably at sort of a survival level. So that's how we get the federal poverty level. That's it. The USDA says, well, this is kind of the economy. I think that makes me think of flying nowadays, where you kind of have to sit half on, half off, sharing a seat with someone else, and you pay extra to breathe more oxygen. Somebody connects it. This is the economy food plan. And I want to take a look at what that economy food plan looked like. I'm not going to read this all to you, but take a moment and look through what you get with this economy food plan. Things like ground beef stretched with fillers like breadcrumbs, processed cheese, fruit cocktail in syrup, lard, cabbage. So the USDA says, somebody said that's really not healthy. Absolutely. The USDA says, well, if you're struggling, you can afford this. And that should be about a third of your income. So take that times 3, boom, we've got it. we now have the federal poverty level. So in the late 1960s, the federal government adopted Orshansky's model, and they update this annually by something called the Consumer Price Index. This is not something I want you to wait for the microphone for. Does anybody know roughly what the CPI is? Tracking common goods and saying this is how much they're going up over time. Kind of an inflation tracker. Say again. Yes, the Consumer Price Index. Yep. That is adopted as how we'll kind of track the adjustments to the federal poverty level. We'll just watch how these prices change over time, and then we'll make little adjustments to that. And another important note about the federal poverty level, the same thresholds are used for the entire country. You all are picking up on some things. Yes. The same as Social Security, someone said. Yes, that's correct. And in 1978, HHS, which is Health and Human Services, uses the federal poverty level to determine eligibility for benefits and programs. So, what do you imagine were some common critiques of this model and why? Yes. Number of people in the family. There is some adjustment for that, but not much. Where you live. What do you mean? Why would that matter? Some places are substantially more expensive. Absolutely. Yes. You're all spot on. How the response here is housing, the cost of housing has outpaced the cost of food in a relative sense. It just doesn't make sense. You're absolutely right. So here are, as you all just identified, common critiques of the federal poverty level. It didn't account for government benefits and tax credits. There are substantial tax credits for what kinds of things? Anybody know what people in the lower earning? Yes, childcare, child tax credit. Yep. Paying for heat and certain utilities, absolutely. There are these tax credits that we have set up to help alleviate the pressure of poverty for people on the bottom. It does nothing to account for that. So that's one side of the critique. Fair, important to account for. It doesn't account for different cost of living in different regions of the country. I'm from Northwest Iowa. All right, Dutch land out there near Orange City, for those of you who are familiar. And I believe the last I looked, a two bedroom, fairly spacious apartment out there was going for about $825 a month. We're going to get to what that costs here in a little bit, but it's not $825 a month. I'll tell you that. Food costs vary. All these different regional costs are different. So that's a problem with the federal poverty level. And on top of that, as somebody mentioned here, the rising cost of not only housing, but healthcare and transportation. So we get this extremely disproportionate or unbalanced measure. But luckily, the government heard the critiques as valid and made rapid changes to get a more realistic picture of poverty in our country. Who was here with me last time? It's back. No, that in fact did not happen. Instead, 47 years after the creation of the federal poverty level, the U.S. Census Bureau and the Office of Management and Budget created the supplemental poverty measure to account for these critiques. So this is not quick, it's not enough, but they said, okay, we need to get an idea, realistically, if we try to account for more of these, contextual differences, if we try to get a picture of how much are the benefit programs that we're offering actually help people, we need to create something that tracks that a little better, and you get the supplemental poverty measure. Now, I have had a hard time finding agreeable data on this, which is surprising to me, but some of that is because they're projecting back. This is the federal poverty level in blue versus the supplemental poverty measure in orange. And you can see they track fairly well with each other, which could be an indicator that it's a fairly strong measure. Also, I want to draw your attention to the scale on the left. These differences aren't quite as big as they may appear at first. We're talking about 3%, 2%. So it's saying, yeah, there are some people that the federal poverty measure doesn't catch that maybe are still in poverty. But with these programs, we're kind of keeping that at bay. That's what their measure says. So let's come back to discussion question here. I'm going to put up 3 of them. And I want you to turn to your neighbor. And again, feel free to chime in on Zoom. Don't cheat if you're on Zoom. No looking it up on Google. Or if you're in the room, you all have smartphones perhaps. What do you think the annual income for a family of 1 is to be under the federal poverty level? So I'm looking for a number of dollars per year that if you make more, you're no longer a part of it. What about a family of 4? And if you would like to go into this for an average full-time position, what would your wage have to be to fall under that? So turn to your neighbors, talk about that for a moment, and then we'll get some responses. All right. I did have one helpful question, point of clarification. For the third question, I'm asking, what does that translate to in wage per hour? Otherwise, it's basically the exact same question as the first one. So very helpful point there. So with this, I'm not going to have you wait for the microphone because we're really just looking for numbers for this one. What do you think for a single individual? Now, this is, again, we're going back to the first question we asked. What does it mean to be poor? There is a right answer from one perspective, which is the government's federal poverty level. Family of 1, what do we think the number is? 30,000. Say again? 25,000. 24. 10 to 15. Okay, so we're getting ranging from about 20 to, I think I heard 30. 10 to 30,000, somewhere in there. Okay, let's take a look at that in just a moment. Family of 4, how much do you think it goes up? 22,000, 25, 45, 36, 40. Okay, this is very, very interesting. I will say some of you are quite close. So breaking this down, and if you didn't do the math, that's quite all right. What do you think the dollars per hour calculation is for a single $14 an hour? 15, 12, 7, 11.75. Wonderful. Let's take any responses on Zoom before I move on. Thank you very much. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this. 2024 income for one person, $15,060. For a family of 4, $31,200. This comes out to $7.25 an hour. What do we think about that? It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Say again. It's pretty skinny. I like that. I like that. Pretty skinny is a good way to say it. When we get to that family of 4, we're now looking at 2 people working for $750 or 1 person working for $15. Now, I don't know what your all background are, family, friends, neighbors that you're connected with. If you can conceive, and throughout this presentation, when I say family of 4, for sticking with the data that I'm working with, we're going to refer to 2 parents, an infant, and a preschooler. Okay. So I don't know if any of you have family, friends, neighbors that are in that. Can you imagine raising a family of 4 today off of 1 person working at $15 an hour? This is, it would not be great for the quality of the marriage, I assume. And unfortunately, that bears out in the data as well. The financial stress and the impact on your relationships and marriage. Yes.
And tell me if I'm going to go off on something that's totally inappropriate.
Okay.
It is inappropriate, tell me. But I'm good friends with several leading politicians here in the city. And one of them was having a meeting with its 8th Street merchant, Great Street in
Yep.
front building. And he said he had foot and mouth to things.
Okay.
He made a remark. He said, well, a good friend of mine running a business in Holland Township and starting people at $19.95 an hour. And 3 women turned to him and said, if I pay over $11 an hour, I'm not a business. You stupid fool. So I don't know if $19.95 is a great wage, but based on your charts, I don't think their women's comments $11 an hour. That's higher than your $7.50, but it's not.
Yeah. So we're getting a comment here about the disparity of wages. We're hearing downtown.
The employer says, I'm out of business, so you're stupid.
I'm out of business if I go over this threshold, which is 11, which, as you can see, is actually well above the poverty level. So one might think, well, that's generous. Look at they're what, time and a half? They're 150% of the federal poverty level. 11 should be great. And somebody else saying, well, I'm paying closer to 20. And I said, we can't sustain that. We can't sustain that. So yes. Yeah, thank you. This is helpful.
Okay, hold on.
Wait a minute.
Trying to get here.
We know businesses are very clever at stopping hourly hiring right before particularly desirable things like medical care and things.
Yes.
Again, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Often you're going to have places that advertise this is a benefited position. You just have to work 36 hours a week or more. Well, guess how many hours a week they're offering? 35 every time. You get benefits. We got people that going through temp services. Temp services, wonderful opportunity for people. This is not a comment against them. I have worked with so many clients who got dismissed on days 87, 88, and 89 working through a temp service. So let's look at what this means, these implications. Anybody here know minimum wage in Michigan right now? 9 something. Yes. We're currently just over 9 something. We're at 10.33 an hour. January 1, that's going to go up to 10.56. February of the fall this next year as well goes up to 12.48. 3 years out, 14.97. And this is all a part of this new legislation that's working through that's eliminating tipped wages. Now, as I understand it, this is not, I don't do legal. That's not really my specialty, but I try to keep up with this. My understanding is this is being challenged and they're actually reworking this right now because the pushback has been so severe. That's another conversation for another time, but this is where we're at, $10.33 an hour. Anybody notice anything about that number compared to the federal poverty level? The federal poverty level is so low, you would only be allowed to work 29 hours a week at minimum wage. If you work 30 hours a week or more at Michigan's minimum wage, it's mathematically impossible for you to be considered poor by the federal government. Now, you can interpret that data a few ways. To me, that's sort of telling of the threshold that we've set might be a little low, a little out of balance. That's one way to consider this. So the impact of this, the federal poverty level is not a great measure, but at least it's not terribly important to people experiencing poverty. No, that's unfortunately terribly untrue. We had somebody mention a few of them earlier, but we'll make this a very quick discussion question. Turn to someone next to you. See if you can come up with any programs or benefits that base your qualification on whether or not you meet federal poverty level guidelines. In other words, you qualify or don't qualify for this program relative to your income, relative to the federal poverty level. See if you can generate a few ideas. Okay. I'm going to bring us back. That one's a little bit quicker because we're just looking for some names, and we're going to start back there with a Zoom response or two if we have them.
So from Zoom, things that would be affected would be SNAP, food benefits, Medicaid.
Yes, SNAP is the new name, what people call food stamps. Medicaid, absolutely. Who wants to add to our list? Yes. FAFSA can be impacted. WIC is impacted. Section 8, also called housing choice voucher. Absolutely. Child care benefits. Yeah. Any others? Yes, some utility assistance, LIHEAP. Absolutely. Yeah. So here's actually a small list of some of them. Community Service Block Grant, Head Start, LIHEAP, parts of Medicaid, Hilberton Uncompensated Services Program, AIDS Assistance, Children's Health Network, National Farmer, Senior Community Service Employment, Workforce Investment, Foster Grandparent Program, Medicare, Community Health Centers, Migrant Health Centers, Family Planning Services, SNAP. And that's not all. Take a minute and read through that. School breakfast, health career opportunities, water assistance, weatherization programs. Now, I will say, and I'll come to you in a moment, these are not all tied to exactly the federal poverty level. Some of them might say 125%, 150, in some cases, maybe 200. Now, my job outside of digging deeper right now, I'm a full-time therapist at a free health clinic in Zealand at City on a Hill. We serve people who are uninsured and underinsured. See if you can spot a little bit of a flaw in the logic here. The federal poverty level states where it's at. Programs that actually want to help people have to keep going at multiples of the federal poverty level. City on a Hill right now, in order to serve as many people as we can who need the services, guess what our threshold is relative to the federal poverty level in order to make the services available to who needs them? This is for free, routine healthcare, mental health therapy, community health worker connections. More. 400%. We are at 400% in order to get to the people who need the services. Okay. The federal poverty level is a measure of who is poor and what it means to be poor. But when you have programs consistently saying, we'll make it 150%, 200%, 140%, that should be telling us something about our measure. Somewhere back here. I'll have you wait for the microphone. Thank you so much. I've got to get better at reminding people. Go ahead.
My question is, because we see this extensive list, but people who are so busy being just surviving, how do they access this stuff? Even if they qualify?
Even if they qualify, not only do they have to get to the places offering these things, when are these places usually open? 9 to 5 weekdays. When do the majority of our workforce people find jobs? 9 to 5 during the weekday. They move applications online. That's fine for some people, but what does that require? Computer or smartphone with internet connection. And then we've got a growing population of people who don't speak English. Some of these applications are in their languages, many are not. We have people who need to go in and talk to someone. But how do they get there? Right? This is a problem that keeps compounding on itself. It is, in my previous work with Community Action House and food security, we had people who would kind of make it a full-time job to try to get from resource to resource because it's that demanding. This is a problem. This is a problem. So if we know the federal poverty level is insufficient to determine who is actually poor, why are we still using it? Talk to your neighbor. Let's see if we can come up with a few reasons. Why are we using this? Okay. Finish up your thoughts. And I'm going to have you wait for the microphone on this one. I see a hand in the very back there to get started. And if you want to kind of put up your hand, if you want to share something, that way Carol knows where she's going next. Why are we still using it, please?
Political will.
Political will. Can I get an amen? Anyone else? Yes, thank you from the Zoom participants.
I think it's more of a question. What would be better?
Yeah. Yes. Wow. Man, if anybody has ever been teed up for the next slide of their presentation, what would be better? Yeah, I would agree. Thank you. Al, correct? Al, thank you. This is political will, plain and simple. What happens if we change the poverty level to account for what it actually means to struggle day in and day out? What happens to that poverty level? Which political party wants to be responsible for doubling, 2.5, tripling the poverty level overnight? That's political suicide. We just went from a country with 13% poverty to 28, 30, 35% poverty. Now we've got a problem we have to deal with. And how do we deal with it now? Programs and money and programs and support, and those cost money. Al, please.
So during COVID, we actually increased the child support and reduced child poverty dramatically.
Yes. Yeah, there are some immensely fascinating graph statistics numbers regarding what the supports that we unlocked during COVID with political will, and not to downplay the necessity of that in any way. But there were some measures that drastically improved during that time. I'm not deeply familiar with all of them, but child poverty and actually homelessness from a national perspective did much better. Yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you for the microphone. Thank you so much, Carol.
I think another problem with this is that people have a unrealistic idea of how much money is spent of the federal government's pot on poverty. Now, I've worked with Bread for the World for more than 25 years, and when I talk to people, they think that we're spending like 20% and higher. And when you tell them the real number, they don't believe you.
Yeah. Do you have it ballpark? I'm not asking you for a hard and fast.
Right. It's something like 1% to 2%.
Who knows where the majority of our country's budget is going? Military defense. Absolutely. Now, I'm not here to parse out how the federal government should use its money. I will say, when the political will existed, we found ways to address problems. And I'll get on my soapbox for just a second and then dash off of it before anyone can knock me down. Why was COVID such a motivator for quick change politically? It affected everybody. Who does poverty affect? Those other people, the less fortunate, the poor. I'm told I'm safe here. We'll see. I think it is paramount to see how quickly we mobilized substantial resources to help when everybody is impacted. And I am not here to say we don't do anything for people in poverty. That's untrue. And yet. One more comment from over here, and then I'll kind of move us on. Thank you.
I was thinking the extent of that list might suggest that we don't trust people in poverty to spend the money like we think they should.
Yes.
And of course, the simplest explanation for poverty is simplest explanation is lack of money.
Yeah.
Give them money, poverty rate goes down. I doubt if you would get studied that there would be a lot of waste in that money that went out for COVID.
Yeah. So for the beginning part there, the comment is it boils down to a lack of trust in people experiencing poverty to use money in ways that we deem appropriate or okay. And I would say a resounding yes to that. In studies, both in our country and abroad, where people are given unrestricted funds, they very rapidly alleviate the suffering they're going through and stabilize. There are some fascinating studies on this. Some of them were done in Africa, some were done in Denver, some were done in Austin. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, look up, and you can find it through search terms like universal basic income experiments or unrestricted funding experiments. It is telling the way that people can improve their lives when they are given resources. That's what they're lacking. I said last time I was here, and I said I would come back to it this time, that I believe there is a cultural narrative that is very powerful in West Michigan, that poverty is a sign of moral failure. You are poor because you are bad. You are sinful, you are wrong, you are stupid, you are lazy. I believe that is very powerful narrative in our subculture.
And I would say there's a very powerful opposite to that, which is that if you have money, you are good and God is favoring you.
I would agree. Just by show of hands, how many of you are longtime West Michigan natives? Okay, especially for you, but for everyone, by show of hands, who thinks there's some truth to this narrative? Okay, not everyone, but many of you. So I'm happy to be wrong. I'm a transplant as well, and I might not have it all the way, but that is the underlying rationale or assumption that I run into when I speak to groups, individuals, businesses, nonprofits, is an assumption about the person. Are there poor people who are not actively helping themselves? Yes. If we take a systems level perspective, is there some reason for why that's happening? I would argue also yes. But I'm going to digress from that a little bit. We're going to jump back in here. We have a political deadlock. We have a society that is fractured into the haves and the have-nots. We have a federal poverty level that says, if you work full-time at $7.25 an hour, you made it. You're out of poverty. Let's talk about what we need to do in response. Alice population. Who here is already familiar with this before I bring it up? Okay, about a third to a half. The Alice population, this is standing for the asset limited, income constrained, and employed. Alice, asset limited, income constrained, employed. Let's break those down. Asset limited. What is the most common asset for wealth in our society? Homes and property. So almost by definition, I suppose you could maybe find some really strange circumstances, but almost by definition, this population are not homeowners. There are some who are, but by and large, these are renting or homeowners where there are issues with the mortgage, the payments, survivability financially in the situation they're in. Other assets, probably next most common, vehicle. Yep. This is a population that by definition lacks assets. When everything goes wrong, if you are not in the Alice population, you have assets you can change, you can liquidate. You can get money out of your things if you absolutely need it. That might not be desirable, but it's possible. For the Alice population, that doesn't exist. Okay, income constrained. We're going to talk about some thresholds and some limits, but these are people who are largely working and are not making enough to live comfortably from crisis to crisis. We always talk about one paycheck away from a desperate situation. And employed, by and large employed. Does anybody who's familiar with this already kind of know the asterisk behind employed? Who else does it include that might not be working, but is often included? Yes, seniors, people on disability, retirement, fixed incomes, right? So that's the population we're talking about. Where does this come from? This is developed by the United Way in New Jersey, all the way back in 2009. I was first introduced to the Alice population idea, I think in 2016. I had no idea that it went back quite as far as it did. This is out of work put together in New Jersey by the United Way. And since then, the United Way has really run with it. So United Way of West Michigan keeps statistics locally about where our population is at in Ottawa County, various counties throughout the state. And then the United Way of Michigan collects this data and releases reports on it. So this is where a lot of our information is going to be coming from. Again, what does it measure? The ALICE project measures households who are technically above the federal poverty level, but consistently struggle to meet their needs due to financial hardship. So let's take a look. What does it mean? On the left, you see 2024 federal poverty level. ALICE on the right, I believe, is the 2023 number. It's about double, right? A hair more than double. Okay. This is for a single person. Let's take a look at a family of 4. Now we're going up about 150% above. An increase of 150%. Again, when we say family of 4, just for kind of conceptualizing this, we're talking about 2 working adults with an infant and a preschooler. Now, that hourly wage that you see there on the bottom, that is for the household. So that's either 1 at that wage or 2 at averaging to that, right? So we're looking at 2 $20 an hour jobs to make it into the ALICE population. Yes, or is that a question? Carol, if you would, thank you.
Is ALICE also a national number or is it regional?
What we're looking at here, the numbers that I'll be using through this presentation are what's called the survival budget, and we'll get back to that, but it is hyper regional. I believe, although the variety may be very small, I do believe it's county by county. At least in our area, I was able to find, the Ottawa County survival budget. So this is what we're talking about here. Let's talk for a minute about the median household income. I just want to do a little bit of positioning. Ottawa County, are most of us here either from or familiar with Ottawa County? Wonderful. Median household income, Michigan versus Ottawa County. Anyone want to throw out a number for what they think median is? Let's start with Michigan. Median household income, 60, 57. Okay, how about Ottawa County? Where do we think we are in relationship to that? Up 70. Okay, let's take a look. Michigan is actually around 70. So I'm going to re-ask now, where do we think Ottawa County is? Above, okay. It is a very wealthy county, someone said. Yeah, we're well above. Quick math says what, 15%-ish, a little under? It's a substantial difference. Okay, let's look at the exact same thing. Oh, and by the way, this is pulled from Census Bureau's one-year estimates from the ACS. Let's talk about the difference between a married person versus an individual. Household breakdown. What do we think you're getting if you're married, I believe is first? What do we think that number does? Yes. Should go up? Yeah, you're absolutely right. 110 and individual. 52. Don't be shy. Throw out a few more numbers. 70. Okay. 42. Okay. This is again pulled from US Census Bureau data. The difference is pretty astounding. Yes. This is Ottawa County was the question. The answer is yes. Yep. Yep, good question. What's the difference between these two slides? So this one is looking at household composition, whether the household is two, I think you can say it doesn't necessarily mean 2 earners, but it means the family makeup has a married, more stable. And I think one of the things important to consider is why is individual not exactly half or very close to half? What does that second person allow for? When you're alone and working, if you have children, single parents, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay, we're going to move on here to poverty rate. What do we think the poverty rate by percent? Now we're looking at FPL here, federal poverty level, state of Michigan. 15, 20. We're actually a little high, which is good. 13.5. Okay. Remember that federal poverty level is pretty low. All right. What do we think that does in Ottawa County? Okay. We're down just at around 10% at the federal poverty level here. Okay. So what do we think is the percentage of households under the Alice threshold? 30, 15, 50, 20. We're getting guesses ranging from about 20 to 50. This is good. This is good. Michigan's at 41%. Ottawa County, again, doing quite a bit better than the state average at 33. Yes, if it's a, go ahead. Yeah, age group, population, population-wide. Seniors, everyone. Yep. Thank you. Good question. Who does this include? This is everyone. So we'll do a little bit of a, oh, did my presentation get stuck here? There we go. Extra credit. Anybody know? 83 is correct. 83 counties in Michigan. If first place has the lowest percent of people under the Alice threshold, how do you think we stack up in the state? There's 83 counties. If first is the lowest level, where are we? I heard someone say third, fifth, fourth. We're all putting us pretty low. You're actually correct. We're third. So one more time, extra credit question here. Anybody want to wager a guess who's lower than us? Traverse City is correct, and no, nope. It was an unfamiliar one to me. Grand Traverse is 1% lower at 32%. And I'm kind of baffled by this next one. Livingston at 28. Now, I don't know Michigan well, so I put up another map here so you can see kind of what's in the square we're looking at. I don't know, does that help? Heartland, Howell. So I'm noticing quite a few people here not surprised by this, which is interesting. I've never heard of, it's right on the edge of Ann Arbor, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I'm hearing some people say sparse population, a lot of commuting. Of course, you're kind of right in between the Detroit Metro, Lansing, Ann Arbor, lots of commuting opportunities available. So Ottawa County, I want you to kind of hold on to this. And we're only about 10 minutes away from when I'm going to open it up for question and answer time. So we're not going to get through everything today, which is great. I'll be back next week to talk some more about this. But I want you to keep in mind through the rest of today, and if you can hold it until next week, everything we talk about from here on out that's Ottawa County specific, there are 80 counties doing worse than us here in Michigan. And the numbers aren't fantastic here. Okay. This is, we're going to start getting into federal poverty level versus Alice. So I showed you earlier, the FPL threshold for a year is $15,060. For a month, that breaks down to $1,255. My question for you, turn to your neighbors and see if you can come up with the 3 largest expenses for a single person household in our area. What are their 3 largest expenses by month? Yeah. Yes. Single person, no children. All right. I am going to bring us back. We are looking for the 3 largest expenses for a single person, no children in our area. We're going to let our Zoom friends join in first.
Housing, vehicle, food, or childcare if there's.
Okay. Okay. Anyone have anything they want to add to? We're going to remove childcare for just a moment. I heard housing, food, transportation, we'll call it. Insurance or medical. Okay. Any other guesses? Utilities, good. Okay. Depending on whose data you're looking at, utilities may be included. You did a great job. You nailed it. Housing, transportation, and healthcare. Yep. All right. Now we're going to in a moment. Well, actually looking at the time, what will probably happen is we'll come back to some of this, but go ahead. If it's a question, I'll have you wait for the microphone. Yeah. What does healthcare mean? We're going to get into that. We're going to define what each of these categories entail one by one. So we're going to do the same thing right now for family. This is our 2-parent, 2-child household. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to give you the list, and then we'll start to go through item by item. Single household top 3 expenses. What does include? What's realistic? What does the Alice population data say? That's kind of where we're going. Let's do this again. I just want you to turn quickly and see if you think there's any changes. How does this differ when we get to a family of 4? All right, how do we think this changes when we go from an individual to a family of 4? What are our top 3 now? Housing, childcare, medical, food. Wonderful. Childcare, housing, and food. Yep. These are going to be your top 3. Now, again, according to the federal poverty level, you can accomplish all of this with $2,600 a month. Okay. So we're going to explore what that looks like when we start comparing it with Alice. Alice Project makes what they call a survival budget. And what's really important to consider with a survival budget, this is everything. When you see the budget that they're working with, this is all inclusive. It is their attempt to get to the lowest possible numbers, and nothing is available beyond what is shown in these budgets. This is the rock bottom. And I want to give a disclaimer here. The United Way's pioneering work on defining a long excluded group of people not technically under the FPL, but struggling to make ends meet has been critically important. Any critiques that I give in this presentation are meant to show that even this tool may be a bit constricted in who gets counted, and or that the Alice population has to choose subpar options to find ways to meet the survival budget. So I just want to be very clear. I am not here saying, oh, you know, federal poverty level is terrible. Alice is also not that good. In no way is that what I'm trying to say. An incredibly important and helpful tool that may even still need some additional help or tweaking, or we have to recognize that in order to make that real, people are choosing options for things like housing and healthcare and food that are not ideal. Here's your survival budget for an individual. Let's take a moment, take a look at that. Housing, including utilities, $814 a month. Your transportation budget, which is going to include your car payment, your insurance, your gas, your maintenance. Okay, $462 a month. Your healthcare, which is going to include any premiums, any out-of-pocket expenses, prescription expenses, co-pays. Okay. Your food, I heard someone say quietly seems high. That's the only one that I sort of think, I might be able to do it. I think I could do it for better than that and still eat okay. But I think some of the others are low. Technology, this is going to include phone, Wi-Fi. You're already pretty much at or over that with just those two. This is not somebody who has Hulu and Netflix and Disney Plus and Xbox Live and all these other things. Okay. Miscellaneous. This is literally everything else. Every single other thing that's not in one of those previous five categories. Credit card would go under miscellaneous. If you're putting something on credit card, clothing, miscellaneous. Okay. Everything else. You want to buy a hot dog for lunch someday from the place outside, miscellaneous or food. Haircuts, clothes, feminine hygiene, right? This is everything else. And then your taxes, because again, we're going to be talking about, we're using these numbers to figure your like hourly wage. So taxes have to be listed as a line item that's coming out of that. So immediate reactions to this. Skinny, there it is again, skinny. I heard somebody say you can't. It's impossible. Okay, I'd become a monk. Let's take a look at oh, we didn't get family 4. All right. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop us here, but I'll give you a teaser for what's coming. We're going to actually walk through each of the 6 categories, first for individual, and then for a household of 4. We're going to break down, what does it look like? What's realistic? Where is this budget, the survival budget for an individual? How does that stack up with numbers I'm finding from people online? Question and answer, forums, searches of my own, friends of mine going through this. And then I'm going to show you the survival budget for a family of 4, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to walk through those expenses. And then from there, next week after we do that, we'll start talking about this in a more local context. We'll start talking about where in Ottawa County does this actually peak? Where is this at its best and where is it at its worst? We'll also talk a little bit about the way wages have changed, sometimes in good ways with the pandemic, and yet countering for inflation and this population that's already falling through the cracks, people are still being left behind. So that's where we're going to go. But we're going to stop here today, and I want to leave some time for question and answer. For this, I do ask if you could wait for the microphone, and when you have it, go ahead and put that thing right up to your mouth so everybody can hear it well. It works better usually straight on than down below.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see this layered with some of the demographic data. Like, what does this look like then for different populations in our community?
Likely get to that. I have that data, and I think there will be time next week to get to that. What does this mean for different demographics of people? Absolutely.
Just a technical question. Is this coming from the American Community Survey, or is this a personal
this budget
with, these budget figures?
These are developed by United Way and the Alice Project. So these are not from the community survey. Good question.
I was kind of surprised by the median income for a single person in Michigan.
Yeah.
Or in the county. I don't remember which, but is that biased by the young, the old, people with mental health? I mean,
that's a great question.
Are there biases that go into that?
I may be able to dig into that a little more before next week. I don't have that handy. It would be very interesting to overlay and look at these bell curves across different populations. My suspicion is that That was from the community survey. So I suspect that was segregated data. So probably looking at 18 to 65, but I will try to confirm that. And also if we have time, we may come back and examine that by demographic as well. Yeah, great question. Yeah, we got plenty of time, so.
What would happen to these numbers if we had more equitable pay for all jobs? So whether you were the garbage collector or working as a bartender or as a waitress, you made a living wage. What would happen to our poverty level? Because I mean, Norway on a 2005, we talked to the waitress and she was making $20 an hour. She said, we do not rely on tips. Everyone in Norway makes a living wage. We respect all occupations. We don't feel that just because you're collecting the garbage, you're a lesser person. The garbage isn't collected, we are in big trouble.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. In short, to give a very technical answer, we would see a lot of relief of these populations. Again, the ideal would be that as people receive the resources they need through hard work, through doing what they need to do to benefit their community, they would find better lives in that. My wife has done some living and studying in Japan and said that at one point there was a law, and I don't know if this was countrywide or specific to the area she was, where president or CEO could only make 1,000 times more than the lowest paid person. I thought, well, that's kind of a lot. When I started doing the math here, and man, would that be a nice limit. I'd love to see it a little lower, but yeah, to tie the two together somehow. I don't know. These are pretty radical ideas. Please.
To the gentleman that mentioned the public transportation available in West Michigan, is that Macatawa Express or is that a different organization?
Yeah. We're going to hear a quick response about the bus and then we'll.
It's strictly dial-a-ride arranged the day before. And that's clear. That's the big issue. It has to be arranged the day before.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Right over here.
Are you aware of any research of the impact of programs that have been suggested from time to time, like giving everybody $1,000 a month in cash payment, and what kind of impact that would have on what we're talking about here?
Yeah. So in lumping that together, there are different ways of doing that. There are different philosophies of how, why, where, who, all of that. But generally, I would say what you're asking about is what we call universal basic income. And in the studies that I have seen, and I am not a researcher, this is more a hobby at this point when I'm looking into stuff like that. It's been substantially impactful for the lowest earners in a community to have some unrestricted, because why do I say unrestricted? What am I referring to here? What other, no strings attached. When you get SNAP benefits, food stamps, that's food only. And it's not anything you can find in a grocery store because you can't buy toilet paper or paper towels with food stamps. All right. When you get unrestricted funds, so as a social worker doing therapy, there's a modality that I use that's called client-centered or person-centered or Rogerian therapy. This is Carl Rogers who developed it. And the baseline assumption is your client is the expert in the client's life. And unfortunately, that's pretty groundbreaking for a lot of people. I went to all this fancy school. I have degrees. I have papers on the wall. Surely I'm the expert. I know what's needed. And we get that attitude culturally. So we tell people, well, we'll help you. And here's how. Here's money for food. Here's money for heating. And I understand the impulse. And I'm not saying that's wrong or bad. But I wonder what would happen on a larger scale if we said to people, you probably know what you need better than I do. Let's look at some of these universal basic income ideas and principles and say, what do you need? How do you decide what you need? And the rhetoric that I saw is mostly online, which I need to spend less time online for my own mental health. The rhetoric after the stimulus checks came out, my goodness, somebody deciding, I've been living in abject poverty for 10 years now, and somebody handed me $600. Guess what? It's not enough to do. Fix my life forever. Guess what it is enough to do? I want a nice TV for once. Because the one thing at the end of the day that I get to come home and relax and enjoy is watching a movie with my kids. And I'm sick of doing that on a 30-inch box TV that has a line going through it from where it doesn't work. You know, and to hear the rhetoric that was spewed about the way people spent that money, to me is sort of an illustration of the opposite side of that. We know what you need. And we will decide whether or not the way you're spending your money is okay or not. I'm straying a little bit from the original question, but it's a great question. I would look up again studies on universal basic income.
You know, the problem is really very complicated.
Yes.
We're spending a lot of money on defense and not enough money on these other things. And yet at the same time, if we increase wages in certain areas of the service industry where everything is, you've got a lot of people that are doing things that aren't really, don't cost a lot of money. And, you know, so what's going to happen is if we increase wages in some of these arenas, it's going to cause rampant inflation in some ways. So it's really, it's a much greater problem than just raising wages. It's a question of, like you say, the 1,000% plus other ways of reallocating our money, which I'm not sure will happen.
A point well taken. A conversation that I've had many, many times in just the last week or two is culturally, we are bad at nuance. We are really bad at nuance. We love black and white. We love one size fits all, and it's easy and it makes sense why we want that. And part of the invitation of lectures like this is to say, it's time to get out of that space. It is not one size fits all. And that's a great point. Some of the solutions that I might think are great, I'm not an economist. I don't know the trickle down effects of all of these different policies that are being argued for, argued against, but I see there's a problem and I'm interested in exploring solutions. Yeah, let's take the two in the back and then we'll come up here. And then I think to Dr. Ostendorf.
I just want to point out that you say military spending is the most. That's only true in its discretionary budget.
Thank you.
If you take the mandatory, it's actually Social Security and Medicare.
Thank you. I really appreciate that correction. I will try to be more careful with that.
My question, because to me, we mentioned this at the very beginning, is about political will.
Yes.
And we're in the middle of a big election cycle. We're sitting, I mean, I came from Wisconsin. I lived in Wisconsin for 40 years. Now I've lived for 4 years in Michigan. They're the states that are like in the torture zone.
Yeah.
Where
it's a good
where we just can't wait for it to be over because it just drives us crazy. But all these rational discussions we're having here, we're talking about rationality.
Yes.
But our voting patterns are not rational. They're emotional and for a large part, grievance based.
Yes.
And people who can trigger people's grievances can get them to vote their way, even when it's against their best interests.
I would tend to agree with that. If you're familiar with Dr. Myers at Hope College, social psychologist, speaks really well about some of that. And I would also say, if you're looking for a little bit of hope in the midst of this, I feel badly that I'm not certain about the name, but I want to say it's Better Angels. Has anybody heard of this? Sitting down people of opposing political views, having a discussion together, bridging the divide that we're told is there and fierce and they're scary and they're other and they're different and there's no capacity for relationship, and realizing we disagree on some things, sometimes strongly, sometimes fundamentally, and yet there is humanity on the other side. And so if you're someone who's needing some hope right now, I think it's Better Angels. Can anyone confirm that? Better Angels, take a look at their stuff. Might be a good source of light in a frustrating time. Certainly.
Am I allowed to make a
Of course,
comment?
we'll have Beverly and then we'll go to you.
You know, I'm just thinking with universal income, that whole list of what these people, Alice Poppy, have to figure out and negotiate, a lot of those organizations would they wouldn't be needed and it would be way more efficient.
Yeah, there was a gold standard that has been used across some nonprofits. I don't know if it has a name, but it's the basic idea is if we folded our budget into just direct relief to community members, would they be better off getting a cash payment for what we're fundraising every year? Or are they better off with our services? And that is not an easy question to ask.
Mhm.
Yes.
This kind of goes along with the whole political will piece. But one thing that I notice is that as soon as you start talking about this kind of stuff, then people start adding socialism to the, oh, this is socialism and we don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to a comment about nuance, we, I think, are culturally primed to find ways of labeling things that mean we don't have to deal with them. If it is socialist or woke or Trumpy or hyper conservative or MAGA, right? We do this across, and this is not just a political spectrum. We do this religiously, socioeconomically, politically, in our community, right? We have, and this is Dr. Meyer's territory and many others, but when this, are we familiar with the word tribalism? Okay, wonderful. This is sort of an inherent problem of our tribalistic attitude right now. They are the them, they are the other, the poor, the homeless, the Democrat, the Republican, the conservative, the liberal, the Christian, the atheist, the Satanist, the whatever. I don't have to engage because they are fundamentally flawed, wrong, bad, or other. Really point well taken. And socialists, certainly when you start talking about wealth and you use a word like distribution, or you use a word like systemic oppression or poverty or generational poverty, a very easy way to dismiss that is to label it something scary.
Another big change is just the description of a job. Used to get a job in 40 hours a week, you got benefits, you got health care, you got vacation time, you got sick time. Most jobs now don't include that.
Yeah.
So many things people are paid by the hour or paid by the whatever. And when you lose that benefit package, that takes away a lot of security for families.
Absolutely. The monetary value of a benefit package alone, let alone the impact on your mental or emotional well-being on top of that all, and we'll come back there in a moment too, is substantial. And there's two comments I want to make on that. One is I received an email from the Lakeshore Nonprofit Alliance, I believe it was, who said part of the change in the law on the tipped wage might be involving mandatory 7 days of sick time for full-time employees. Can anyone else? So I have not read through that, but that would be a substantial change. The other comment that I wanted to make was, if anybody here follows NPR, there was a story, I'm going to ballpark maybe about 2 months ago, about the disappearance and the impact of the loss of pensions and the focus on retirement and 401k instead of pensions. And if that is, as someone who's in the workforce now, I did not understand how fundamental a change that was, because for me, it's always been IRAs and 401ks. I'm going to come to John, and then we'll come back to our Zoom audience.
So when you were showing these 50-some activities that are based on the federal poverty level, my other question, and maybe you don't have an idea, what is the administrative cost as a percentage of what the people actually get once you break it down to all those?
Phenomenal question. And unfortunately, I don't have that. As you might imagine, that's fairly difficult data to find. I will look a little more, but I doubt I'm going to find anything terribly satisfying on that. Thank you, though. It has to be. We know it is. I'm going to come to the Zoom audience, and then we'll see. We might have time for one more after that.
I think it's just a comment from one of our online participants. Sure. When you were talking about the better angels, she said it's braver angels.
Thank you.
And she said there's also an organization, Colossian Forum in
Yes.
Grand Rapids.
Colossians Forum is another really, and maybe they'll be able to correct me in real time. Thank you for the correction. So Braver Angels, did I get that right now? Braver Angels is who you want to look at for those political discussions. My understanding is Colossians Forum may have just put out a video of a group of pastors who spent like a year together from across the political spectrum and across the religious tradition spectrum as well, and worked together to form relationships and work through very, very, very different theological opinions. I want to say, this is something I'm hearing from a coworker, but I want to say it is or was in a movie theater in Grand Rapids, and there's been some follow-up discussions, and I wish I could get you a name for that. Maybe that's something I can send in after the fact to be distributed. Last question for today, I think.
So I'm sort of struck by one thing here. Well, a lot of things
Sure.
here. This is all sort of new to me, but we keep talking about the word survival too, which I think, what are the long-term impacts if you live in consistent survival mode? For children growing up in this environment, what does that mean for perpetuation? And,
That is, I'm so glad you asked that. And I actually want to send you home with that question. We're going to talk the whole next session, vast majority of it, about survival budgets. We're going to talk about how even the great work that's being done might not fully capture some of the needs and some of the costs associated with this. And so the concessions that one has to make to stay under a survival budget, what does that do to someone? And I have some really specific ideas coming out of the mental health field, but there are effects beyond that. I imagine, I don't know if there's any particular closing that needs to be given from here, so I'll leave space for that, but I will otherwise just say, thank you so much for joining today. I'm looking forward to next week. We're going to continue on this discussion. I'll stick around for a little bit afterwards if you have further questions, but thank you for having me. Thank you for being such an engaged and engaging audience. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next week.